We've had all sorts of publicity stunts in the past. For instance, Secretary Mnuchin, during the first Trump administration, he had this trip to Fort Knox. He stepped in, he had a look around, he stepped out, and he declared to the camera, gold is safe. The gold reserves are safe. But that's not a proper audit. Just
Not at
having a
all.
look at a few bars, like how do you know these are not bricks of tungsten painted gold?
But let me ask you about Fort Knox. This was my basic thoughts on the situation at Fort Knox. I feel like the administration must feel strongly that all of the gold is there, or at least the vast majority of it is, because it seems to me like it would be too risky to be doing this public of an audit if they didn't know that. I just feel like it would be really damaging to the US dollar if it turned out, imagine if there was no gold there at all. I mean, that would just be a crippling blow to the US dollar's dominance. So what do you think about the situation at Fort Knox? Do you think the gold's going to be there? Do you think it's not going to be there? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, let's mention the numbers. There are supposedly 8,133 metric tons of gold in the US gold reserves. Now, they are divided among a few locations. Of course, Fort Knox is the most famous one, but it only holds officially 4,583 tons of gold, and the rest is divided between West Point, with 1,679 tons. And there's also some gold in Denver, 1,363 tons. And the rest is in New York, perhaps a couple more places. But these three locations are where the bulk of the gold is held. Now, if they really want to do a proper audit of the gold reserves, then they need to examine all three places at once. Because you never know if someone is going to try, you count the gold in Fort Knox and then you move to West Point and they start moving, they start sending
Exactly.
trucks with gold from Fort Knox to West Point so you can count the rest there and you're going to be double counting the same gold. So you really have to, you really have to be careful and you really have to conduct an audit in all three places at once.
That's a really good point. So all this is going to prove is that the gold at Fort Knox, which is the lion's share of it, so to speak, the largest amount in one location. All this is going to prove is that that gold is there, because I haven't heard any talks of them doing all of the locations simultaneously, and that's what they would really need to do if they wanted to prove to the
Yeah.
public that they had all of it.
And also, we've had all sorts of publicity stunts in the past. For instance, Secretary Mnuchin, during the first Trump administration, he had this trip to Fort Knox. He stepped in, he had a look around, he stepped out, and he declared to the camera, gold is safe. The gold reserves are safe. But that's not a proper audit. Just
Not at
having a
all.
look at a few bars, like how do you know these are not bricks of tungsten painted gold?
Right, absolutely.
You need to examine the bars, at least pick up, random bars and have them examined, see what's the metal content of these bars. And also another thing is that you need to go through the books and you need to see who owns that gold. Because if that gold is leased to someone else, and if it doesn't belong to the US government, or it's just being stored there,
Right.
but officially it belongs to someone else, then it's no
Then
good.
that doesn't count.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
doesn't
you can't
count.
back a treasury with that.
Definitely. So the audit needs to be done properly for once, because I don't know, I think the last time Fort Knox was properly audited was sometimes during the 50s. Now think about it. That's so many years, and that's so much gold. And now you are saying that Donald Trump must be quite confident that the gold is there, otherwise he wouldn't call for an audit. Now, a funny
That
thing is, on one of his speeches, he said, "Oh, we should audit Fort Knox. I've always heard that there's so much gold there." And he said something like 400 tons. Now, perhaps he got confused. He said 400 instead of 4,000. But it strikes me that if he really knew exactly what was going on there, and if he already received reports about what is going on in Fort Knox, then he wouldn't get the number mixed up. He would remember that it's over 4,000 tons. So it seems to me that he's not really familiar with the issue. He probably knows that this is something that needs to be looked at, but I don't think he has. Let's put it this way, I don't think he has an intimate acquaintance with the precious metals market the way you and I do.
I bet you're right. I bet you he just kind of has a passing familiarity. And that could have indicated that. It might have been a slip of the tongue, but I don't think, yeah, I don't think he's as into it as we are. Um, they say the annual check is just checking the seals and making sure they hadn't been broken, which is, pretty weak in my opinion. If they're really going to do it and they really want the world to know it's all there and it's real, um, but they would have to go through bar by bar. And I would say every single bar at a minimum would need to have a strong magnet ran over it. It would need to be, um, they need to hit it with the XRF or maybe a Sigma, something along those lines. And then, I wouldn't advocate for drilling into too many of them, but probably, 1 or 2% of them, like get a core sample. They're going to have some guys out there ready to remelt this gold, but do a real check.
Yes,
Um,
definitely. Everything you've mentioned should be done. They should melt random bars and check the content. It needs to be done. Now, even if everything is there, you need to do it in order to foster confidence, especially if you have any intention to revalue the gold or issue gold-backed treasuries as we've discussed last time. Of course, you need to demonstrate that the gold is really there and to end all those rumors and all those doubts regarding the US gold reserves and create confidence among the public that it's being managed properly.
Right, absolutely. Because there is quite a bit of the population that thinks it's empty. I've seen a lot of people post that online. And some of these people have pretty big voices. I think even if they have to play a shell game and shuffle some gold around, they're gonna make sure it's all there. So I really think that the vast majority of it, if not all of it, is gonna be there. That's what my guess is. But that doesn't mean that all 8,133 tons are still in the possession of the United States. That just means all the gold at Fort Knox is still there.
Look, I don't know if the gold is there or not, but if it isn't, then the culprit, the most likely culprit, in my view, is someone who's already long dead. I'm talking about LBJ. Because
Sure,
if you think about it, when was gold under stress for the first time? Back in the
mm,
60s.
yes.
Yes, because people think about the 70s. That's when Nixon had to get the United States off the gold standard. But it only happened in 1971 after there was a prolonged run on the gold in Fort Knox. I mean, at the time, according to the Bretton Woods Agreement, they could convert their dollars, foreign nations could convert their dollars to gold at a fixed exchange rate of $35 an ounce. Now, they try to protect that exchange rate for a very long time, and they set up the London gold pool for that purpose. So there was an extended period of time during the 60s when inflation started to creep in, and foreign nations could still get their gold out of Fort Knox, and there was a run on the gold there, and the US gold reserves they absolutely plummeted during that period. Now, if you ask me when was Fort Knox ransacked, if it was ransacked, then it probably happened during that period. I'll give you an example from your personal finances. Let's suppose that you lose your job and you have no income and you have all those bills and you have all those expenses. Uh, what are you going to do first? Before you even take on debt, you would use your savings. You would deplete your savings. That's the first thing you would do. So
Right, of course.
since we know the US and the dollar was under stress beginning in the 60s and of course ending in the 70s, it's likely that the US used its gold reserves in order to try to shore up the dollar at the time. We know that eventually what saved the dollar, a few factors. Well, first of all, it was the agreement with Saudi Arabia to sell oil for dollars only, which created the petrodollar. And also around 1980, when Paul Volcker jacked up interest rates to such an extent that it was again profitable to hold US treasuries, and that's what ended inflation back then. But perhaps in order to stop the inflation back then, perhaps they had to use all that gold that they had in order to satisfy the market's demand for gold. And now that we are again battling inflation, then our savings are depleted. Now now we're in real trouble because we don't have those reserves, those savings in order to save us. I don't know. And we won't know until we open the vaults and see what's in there.
That would be a nightmare. But yeah, we don't know for sure until they actually do it. Um, I think everyone really that's what they would like to see. And I just don't see people. Let's just say if they were going to use a bunch of the gold to back treasury bonds, I don't see people investing heavily in those if there's this much skepticism about if the gold's there or not. If there's that many people doubting if the gold's there or not, it seems like it's something they have to do at this point. If they're going to move forward. And of course, I mean, they can't responsibly revalue all the gold if they haven't proven that it's all there. So it'll be interesting, and I know everyone's been watching it.
Regarding this topic of gold revaluation, many people are talking about it right now. And one thing that I want to make clear, revaluing the gold to its current market price, as far as I'm concerned, it does nothing. It does nothing to shore up the finances of the federal government. Because, okay, theoretically, they can borrow against the value of their revalued gold. That would give them about what, $800 billion? That's
Something
less,
like that, yeah.
that's less than $1 trillion. They can theoretically reduce the deficit. It's just an accounting trick. It still means that more dollars are flowing into the economy. It's not going to stop inflation, but at least officially, the deficit will be reduced by a little less than $1 trillion. But it's only going to happen once. You can only do that trick once, right? So if you really want for that revaluation to help the finances of the federal government, you need to revalue the gold to a much, much higher price than the current market price. I mean, like if you revalue it not to $3,000 an ounce, but to $30,000 an ounce, for instance, then you get instead of $800 billion, you get 8 trillion. Okay, now you're talking some serious money. And if you revaluate it to, let's say, $300,000, then you get $80 trillion suddenly. So with $80 trillion, you can cover the entire national debt and have some left over in order to start funding all those unfunded liabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. So with everything going on with the economy right now, with the metals markets, um, I just wanted to say to folks who are listening, I think if you do need to sell something right now for some extra cash, I've heard of people selling their silver. I think it's a terrible time to sell your silver. If anything, I would say sell your gold before your silver. At this point right now, gold's already broken out. If you got just anything, furniture you don't use often, you name it, old tools that you'll never use again. You bought a wrench that fit the transfer case on your old Jeep and you don't own that Jeep anymore and you literally have nothing else to do with that wrench. Go sell that wrench. You find those items around your house to sell. That's what I would encourage people to do. What do you think? Do you think right now is a bad time for folks to sell their silver?
Yes, I agree with you. The last thing I would sell right now is silver. Silver hasn't had that huge run up that we would expect, given that gold is setting new all-time highs. I would expect to see silver surpassing $50 long ago. It just demonstrates what kind of a grip the big banks have over silver and how important it is for them not to allow the price of silver to run. And it's even more important to them than gold, obviously. But as they're losing control over the gold market, we should expect them to lose control over the silver market as well. And I know it doesn't look this way right now because the price is kind of lingering. The gold to silver ratio is above 90. It's absolutely depressing to hold silver. In retrospect, if you check out what was the price of silver a year ago, it was around, I think, $22 an ounce. So it has gone up substantially, but if you compare it to other things, certainly if you compare it to all those meme coins who has, their value has multiplied many times over, then silver, of course, looks lackluster right now. It looks kind of, it doesn't look very enticing, but this is exactly when you should be most bullish, when nobody's looking at that commodity and when the fundamentals are so great, and when you just know that once the Fed starts easing again, once the Fed cuts rates back to zero, once they start printing dollars again, you're you're almost guaranteed that it's going to take off together with gold. The next time the price of gold starts running, it's probably going to rise to $50 an ounce. Perhaps it's going to have a bit of a consolidation there, but eventually it's going to go through that $50 an ounce, and eventually it's going to set new all-time highs. And we all know the fundamentals are just so good, so positive for silver. I wouldn't let go of my silver right now.
Absolutely. And you know what I would also just like to mention to the listeners is over the last 20 years, we've seen the gold to silver ratio break under 50 multiple times. It happened back in like the 2006, 2007 era a couple times. And in 2011, it broke all the way under 40. So as recently as 2011, we had a gold to silver ratio in the mid 30s. And so that's something people can keep an eye on too. Because, I'm not necessarily recommending hang on to your silver forever, but there's no way I would sell mine right now. I'm going to be looking for a much better gold to silver ratio because I really want to get as much out of it as I can when I do sell it. And I just encourage people to think about that.
Yeah, I want to remind folks that currently it is coming out of the ground with a ratio of 1 to 7 compared to gold. Because the price has been so low for so long that there hasn't been much of an incentive to mine silver, especially as a primary metal. So it's coming out of the ground at a very low ratio, and although it is reasonable to assume that there's a lot of above ground silver floating around there, still a lot of it is getting used, a lot of it ends up at the bottom of a landfill. So when the day comes and the price starts running, I think we're going to see some kind of a silver mania along with the gold mania. What we've seen thus far in the precious metals market, it's just the very, very beginning of what we should see, what is waiting ahead. In all likelihood, there's another wave of inflation coming, and just hold tight to your physical metals. I think people are going to get rewarded for their patience. Thank you for listening to the Silver Hermit podcast. If you like this content, please donate in the link which appears in the description below. Please subscribe to this channel and share it with your friends and family. Hit the bell icon to be notified whenever I release a new video. Remember, I'm not a licensed financial advisor. This video is intended for general informational purposes only and should not be regarded as investment advice. Before taking any investment decision, please consult with a professional financial advisor who may assess your personal investment objectives and needs.